Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
As is our custom, we'll go around and say our names first, and then the speakers. My name is Ray Dyer.
Phil Chiles.
Daniel Roskin.
Bruce Golden.
George Hubbard.
Bob Siddlepan.
Richard Morris.
Josh Alexander.
Randy Natal. Gary Clifford.
Ari Klein. Aaron Bullock.
Peter.
Howard Ford.
Chris.
Andre.
David Lewis.
Carl Moore.
Harley Shapiro.
Lee Smith.
Mark McCullough. Kay Matsuda.
Michael Green.
Michael Murphy.
Dr. Groff.
Patrick.
Don Rupert.
Steve Carson.
Harvey Whitten.
Jim Stewart.
Jack Busby.
David Black.
Paul Shepard.
Peter Dell.
Scott Davis.
Barry Krieger.
Jim Christopher.
Rich Arnett.
Adam Elvis. Richard Hedden.
Is anyone here for the first or second time today? Welcome. Anyone else? I'd like to remind our old-timers to welcome our newcomers. This morning we have our Dharma Duo, which is two members of the sangha sharing about their spiritual paths. Bill Chiles, on our left, has been a long-time meditator, and we actually met at a gay men's meditation retreat many years ago. And he does work with the Zen Hospice Project at Laguna Honda on a weekly basis and has been doing that for a number of years. Daniel Roskin, on the right, has been trying to meditate since he was 19 years old. And he's currently working with prisoners in San Quentin and tries to apply some of his Buddhist practice to that work. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Well, welcome everybody. I felt extremely intimidated by this opportunity because I'm very fond of the fellowship. It means a great deal to me, and I think the closer you are to a group of people, sometimes I find the harder it is to speak from the heart in front of them freely, which I think is ironic, because I can't imagine a kinder, more compassionate audience than this. It's also an interesting weekend because yesterday was the first time I've given a solo recital with a voice teacher I've been working with. So it was kind of like a weekend of performance anxiety. And
Very good.
thanks, Don. Yeah. So when Jim asked me to do this, I was thinking of I love musicals, and one of my favorites is Singing in the Rain, and I was just thinking of Lena Lamont, who can't sing, and she's standing in front of the stage at her premiere, and everyone's asking her to sing, and she just says, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" So Peter Cabarda said, "Well, just tell her about your life. That's good enough." So I'll give it a shot. In the words of this great lesbian humorist Fran Lebowitz, like her, my favorite two activities in young adulthood were smoking cigarettes and plotting revenge. Because I was not a very happy camper. I think fundamentally I was living like many gay men in my generation. I was born in 1952. I was living a closeted life. And this was carrying me through high school, through college. I got drafted into the U.S. Army after my first year of college. which is a profoundly homoerotic experience. I mean, the whole basic training experience is all they talk about is sex, and it's gay sex. So to try and somehow keep your libido at bay when you're surrounded by 39 other really healthy, buff male men, and yet just threaten that if they know that I'm gay, they're going to kill me. They'll give me a blanket party and they'll kill me one night. It's maintaining this horrible secret, and I've attended a lot of self-help, psychological, and bodywork workshops where I've heard some people in the therapy community talk about how difficult it can be for gay men, especially from more closeted generations like mine, to talk openly and freely, because we spend so much of our life maintaining deep secrets and not trusting people that are ostensibly close to us with some really very deep-seated truth about who we are. Hearing that helped me understand some of what I've had to overcome. My first means of living a very closeted and isolated life was to spend a lot of my life intoxicated. I used to drink myself into a stupor every night in my 20s. And at some point I realized it was doing so much damage to my body and my brain that when I stopped with the help of a psychotherapist, and I've also started using the help of a very well-known 12-step program, it was about 3 months or so of my body cleansing itself and just having this wonderful feeling of renewal and good health. And in AA circles, they call this the pink cloud. But after that time, all these emotions started to percolate up, and it's amazing how the emotional part of one's mind just stores everything. It's like it stores everything on a hard drive to play back later when you're ready to deal with it. And I had a lot of intense experiences of grief, even dating back to the time when my father had died, which was about 10 years prior. And all that process of grief had been stored up and waiting for me to experience it later in life. That was also a time when I was just as clear as a bell that it was time to come out, that I was gay. I was not questioning. I was not bisexual, as I thought all through college. I was gay. And I could see it because looking back, it's one of the Buddhist precepts is to avoid intoxicants. And I can see that's one of the primary reasons why, is it got me in touch with my feelings and got me back in touch with my sexuality. And that's when I started the experience of dating and experiencing my first heartbreak, which typically a healthy individual would experience at the age of 12 to 14 or 15. And I was going through this now at the age of 34. My first heartbreaks, my first loves, my first sexual experiences of any consequence. It could be very, very humiliating, but I'm very glad at the same time that I had a community in which to experience it. A few years after that, I had come to San Francisco for the second time in my life. The first time I was 8 years old, and I came here with my parents, and I discovered this moon bridge in the Japanese tea gardens in Golden Gate Park, and my parents said I wouldn't leave. They were about to leave me there because I just refused to leave. And I always thought that was like some sign that there was something holding me here, and I had to come back. It just took me many years to do it. And I came here with friends to attend some workshops and decided that I really wanted to come back here as often as I could. And I had a relationship at the time with a man I met in Washington, D.C., and he'd also lived here in the 70s. And we decided after one trip that we felt so bereft when we were flying back to Washington, D.C., where we both grown up, that we should come back here. And part of the reason why was that I was in search of validation, very much because I was gay, and I had met people that said the Bay Area is one of the best places to really explore your sexuality and just explore the process of self-actualization. Whereas I felt in Washington, life was about career, and most of my friends were very focused on their career and their graduate studies. And when I relocated here, it gave me some opportunities to meet an interesting and wonderful bunch of people. Because it's a very lonely process relocating. I was involved in another 12-step program, and that is where I wound up meeting a number of people who had very well developed spiritual practice. And one of the cornerstones of 12-step recovery is the 11th step, where you seek through prayer and meditation a closer contact with your higher power. A Freudian slip in some of them is you seek it through prayer and medication, not meditation. I met several people that had told me about other opportunities to practice meditation outside of the 12-step process. And that was my introduction to Buddhism. My mind had been so closed in the past that though I met people that practiced yoga and Buddhism back in Washington, I still had a very closed mind about it. I just thought that was a little bit too woohoo for me. And I somehow was ready for it after spending a few years' time here. And I got a contact about the Gay Men's Meditation Retreat. And I had a friend that wanted to do some work, kind of self-examination. And I said, well, if we go on this together, this meditation retreat might be a very good opportunity for us to sit and write and work on ourselves. And we realized that it was going to be spent largely in silence, but because I was going with several friends, it felt more comfortable. And in fact, I think Ray was on that retreat, and that's where I met Jim Stewart. And I think Jim Christop was there too. There were several people that I met back then that I still very close to today. A lot of things came up in that process, not the least of which was all kinds of just odd fantasy thoughts, like the fact that because people were silent, they hated me or they hated each other. It's really, really weird stuff about the meaning of silence in life as I've known it in my family. And I found it was truly a life-changing experience to go through that weekend and spend it largely with people intimate but in almost total silence. And it's kind of like a Zen-like process, or some people refer to it as beginner's meditation, because it's a group that allows you to gently go into the process of silence, because we have opportunities to speak in the evening, and because the silence is maintained in a guest house, and you can talk to a friend if you really need to, and just go outside and take a hike in the redwoods. So it's a very gentle way of getting yourself into that silence over a 3-day weekend. And since that time, I've been on that 2 times a year for very, very many years until my schedule got a little too busy. But that got me into the process of quieting my mind and being much more comfortable in silence and more comfortable with myself. It gave me a greater sense of the psychology of Buddhism. I think has a lot to do with being more self-aware, more mindful of the thoughts that creep into the mind, and to be able to let go of judgment of that process of thinking. It's also taught me in the process of experiencing thoughts and emotions, often to just label them as a means of letting them go, not judging myself for thinking when I'm trying to meditate, but just saying, I'm remembering a resentment, or I'm feeling loss or sadness, or that's jealousy, or that's joy, that's humor, and just letting the thoughts pass. It's also been vital at times of personal turmoil, and deep-seated or painful emotions, to know that they do pass. It's part of the process. I was kind of interested in a show of hands of who else here around the time of 9/11 experienced some kind of turnaround or upheaval in your life. Did anybody have anything like that happen? So a few. I'm just curious because a lot of people that I was close to seem to have a lot of things happen. It's like around the time of the attack on the World Trade Center towers. It's almost like we just let things happen in our lives that had been on hold. In my case, I'd had a relationship that had lasted about it's growing on about 7 or 8 years, and I had beautiful house on Liberty Street and a really nice career working as a programmer and analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco. And thought, to the appearance of a lot of people out on the outside, everything was great in my life. But inside, I wasn't very happy with it or satisfied. I always had this feeling of emptiness and I guess just a lack of fulfillment. And I had not really aligned myself with any kind of program of spiritual development or a really close, tight spiritual community, other than going to a few, attending Glide, which is a wonderful experience. You go into a Glide celebration on Sundays, but it just wasn't quite my voice. And around that time, I realized my career didn't work. I didn't like living where I was living. I didn't really care about the house, as nice as it was. It felt like a burden. And about that time, my relationship had come to an end. My partner had told me that he was in love with somebody else. In fact, he was with his other partner in New York City when those attacks occurred. I remember him calling me and saying he couldn't get out of the city. He was trapped there for several days. So it was quite a shock, because I thought that everything I had been doing was I made decisions to work on this relationship and better maintain it, and even to the point of relocating to the wine country in Sonoma and quitting my job here in the city. And at that time, I remember reading Pema Chodron's book, When Things Fall Apart, and I found it was a great help and comfort to become involved in the Buddhist community and to read books like that, because I felt I just felt so depressed and betrayed, that I was encouraged to maintain a sense of gratitude through all of this. And I just realized the power of this practice at a difficult time like that is to cease to dwell on things that hadn't worked in my life, but to realize I still had so much to be grateful for, because at the time I was in perfect health. I was financially sound. Everyone in my family was healthy. I had friends. I had a wonderful place to live. It's like I could accept the fact that I might feel pained and sad or betrayed, but at the same time I had so much to be happy about. And I was also very touched when I was reading Pema Chodron's book. She was saying, if there's a time in your life when you feel lonely or isolated, that one can always think about your connection with other people in the world and what kind of feelings they might have. In other words, consider the loneliness and pain and isolation of people that could be living thousands of miles away, and just all the tens of thousands of people that are dealing with some kind of emotional pain. And I found comfort in that. Because at 2 o'clock in the morning, if you can't sleep and you feel like that, you don't want to be picking up the phone and calling friends saying I'm hurting. It's thoughts like that really turned my life around, and I think that was also about the time I'd gotten close to the gay Buddhist sangha and was more seriously studying Buddhism and practicing meditation with that community. And I also met a fellow there named Steve Kellogg, he was in his 80s, and he had been practicing meditation for 45 years. And he expressed this incredible equanimity. His partner had he'd suffered a stroke and had been in the hospice ward at Laguna Honda for 6 years. And his partner died shortly after he joined the community. And though he talked of his loss, he was always so happy. He spoke of the wonderful care that they received there, the wonderful community, how happy his partner was, how he always smiled all the time, even though he was bedridden and paralyzed. It's like if there was a negative thought, he was incapable of feeling or expressing it. And I wanted what he had. I mean, he was like a great poster child for the practice of meditation. And it was Steve who encouraged me to check out the Zen Hospice Project and attend one of the happy hours that they hold there every 2 weeks, right in the hospital ward. And I decided after about 6 months to go ahead and take their training, which lasts over a 2-week period. And part of the practice there was from reading children's books, I was interested in investigating things that frightened me, things that I had aversion to, and one of those was just the whole process of death, and perhaps alleviating some of the guilt I felt that I hadn't been quite so present for my father's death in 1980. And part of that training does help one get through that process, and it's basically a training that allows volunteers in the community to sit at bedside with people in the final stages of their life and to be able to do nothing. We're capable of doing favors and running errands for residents there, but what really astounds me is that the community is able to sit and do absolutely nothing but sit and hold the hand of somebody at bedside, or just place your hands on their arm or forehead and comfort them. And I've seen how just mere human contact and touch has actually been able to quiet somebody that's in tremendous agitation at the end stage of their life. And it's been a very moving experience, and to me a great honor to be able to be with people at that point in their life, and to see the variety of experience that people have with it, how some embrace it and go very gracefully, and some are not able to accept that process and where they are and fight it, to see how some people prefer to pass alone and some are more comfortable surrounded by their family. To me, it's what else can I say? It's just an honor to be a part of that, and to be able to overcome my fear and resistance to it. I think with that, I feel like I'm taking up too much time, and I'm very anxious to hear what my partner Daniel has to share. So thank you. Just let's keep going.
Thank you. It's nice to see so many friendly faces out there, because it is a little scary and daunting to get up here and talk. I managed to avoid it for a year after Jim first asked me, and he kept at it, so I finally said yes, just to get it out of the way. But even back then, actually, when I saw the first Dharma Duo experience, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Steve and Paul. I was really moved by it. And it reminded me of a dream that I had over 20 years ago, so I was in my early 20s. And the dream was, it was my turn to get up and speak the truth that day. And I kept asking God, who kind of took the form of this avuncular man that I knew from the gym. But just a really kind guy, a little bit older, and he just had this air about him. You just felt like you could trust this man. And anyway, so he was hovering right about here, and he kept saying, well, it's just your turn, just do it, it's not a big deal. And it was one of those Moses kinds of why me experiences that I was experiencing in the dream. And he said, just get up there and read these 3 envelopes. And so he handed me the 3 envelopes, and each one had a letter on it. One was L, so if I get this, so L, T, and D, which stood for Living Truth Daily. But then you know how in dreams things switch up, and all of a sudden the envelopes have 3 different letters. TDS, Truth Daily Said. So my job that day, just like it would be everybody's job at some point, was to get up and read these 3 envelopes, which taken together would be the lesson for the day. So even back then, my gay gene was in full flower because I was on a little Evita balcony, with the masses down there. Nervous but excited about that too. And so I had the 3 envelopes, and I just took what was ever in each envelope out one by one. All it was an account of a person's life written in their own hand. No big philosophical message. It was just their life, how they saw their lives. And those 3 lives taken together for that day held some truth that we were all supposed to glean from. So if we could just get one more guy up here, I think that would cover us for today. I grew up in Denver, and I grew up in kind of a multicultural family. My mother's from Switzerland, and so we grew up speaking Swiss German along with English. And when I was about 12, we adopted a little girl from Korea, and my parents encouraged her to know the customs of that country and to be familiar with her background. So I kind of grew up in this multi-culti environment to begin with, and I think that made it easy for me to experience Buddhism or the philosophy behind it pretty early on. When I was about 19, I had a friend who told me about chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. I don't know if there might be some people familiar with that in here. Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism, which is Japanese-based sect, and they meditate through chanting. And the idea back then, it was kind of materialistic, but it was chant for what you want. What is it you want? Well, chant for it. So being 19, I chanted to get into the 21-year-old bars. I swear it's true. My friend said, well, let's try it. And because I had a fake ID that didn't really work. And I tried to get into this bar, the hot bar at the time before, and they turned me down flat with that ID. So I said, this isn't going to work. And Dennis said, come on, let's just try it. So we chanted all the way to the bar. And I showed my ID and walked right in. I thought, wow, this is good. Got me started in Buddhism. I chanted to meet certain guys, and sure enough, most of the time it worked. So why I stopped chanting, I don't know. The track record is good. At some point, though, I just started reading a lot of philosophy, Eastern philosophy, and I read a lot of Ram Dass and other Hindu and Buddhist teachers in my early 20s. And that's how I kind of became involved increasingly in Buddhism. I had a bunch of Mormon friends growing up as a teenager especially, and when they would lapse, when they wouldn't go to church enough or they wouldn't hold the precepts of the church, they called themselves Jack Mormons. Some of you may be recovering Mormons, so you know that term. But I kind of see myself as a Jack Buddhist sometimes. I have real good intention to practice more, and if it wasn't for the sangha, I don't know if I really would be doing it so much as thinking about doing it. I'm a Buddhist in the abstract a lot of times. I thought I'd share a little bit about growing up and then talk about my work at San Quentin. Like I said, a normal childhood for the most part, a very healthy childhood. But then things really took a turn for the worse for me in junior high in 7th grade. And I think a common experience for a lot of gay youth, and then later turned into gay adults, is some kind of traumatic experience at the hands of your peers. I was pretty much completely and summarily rejected by the kids in 7th grade. I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I really internalized that something was really fundamentally wrong. And I was a much more effeminate kid, and I see that today in home movies when I watch my parents' home movies of how I would just be joking around as a kid, with my brothers and sisters, and I had a lot of diva mannerisms, I guess you could say, but it was completely unconscious. It's who I was, and my parents never said anything about it. They never, in fact, really noticed it, interestingly enough. But I could sure see it in retrospect. On my peers' side, when I got into the 7th grade, really, there were a few experiences that kind of really set the stage for the struggles that I would have later in life around that. as a psychologist, I studied development, and the peer relationship for kids in that age group is as crucial to a healthy developing sense of self as early parental kinds of attachments and relationships are. In fact, they become primary, those attachments to your peers around junior high. And being rejected can have long-term effects. So I was harassed, and I was threatened with being beat up, and I ended up not taking the bus home from school anymore because I was afraid I would get smear the queer kind of thing. So I ended up riding my bike home every day, and it just became very much internalized. I wasn't able to talk about it with my parents. They're very progressive folks, wanted to know what was wrong with me, wanted me to get into therapy. I kind of rejected all of their attempts to help me. I just had pretty quickly realized there's something really wrong with me. Maybe they don't see what it is, so let's keep that going, that shell. That they're not seeing it. My peers are. I don't know why they hate me. Just for me is really what it felt like. So that began a lifelong struggle with a healthy sense of self. I think a self that at its core doesn't feel lacking in some way or bad or shameful. Certainly not uncommon for gay men and gay women, I suppose, too. But there's a real sense in which gay men who aren't naturally or willing to buy into the masculine notions of being a man, I think receive a lot more stuff from the environment around how negative that is, what that means about you as a person. Well, as an adult, I think that sense of self and that desire for connection with my peers. In other words, growing up, before I came out to myself and a friend at age 19. And all my desires, all my kind of psychological dynamics around wanting to connect with my peers, with the guys who had rejected me in school, I think just kind of shifted to the gay community. Now, it was gay men that I wanted to connect with, and I was deeply afraid of being rejected by them, whether at the bars or even though I really wanted to go and use that fake ID, it was still a really scary kind of experience to maybe not look a certain way or the right way or be muscular enough or handsome enough or all the body fascism that's out there, buying into that and what it means to be a valuable gay person, a gay man. Those shifted, those feelings, those thoughts, ideas kind of just shifted to the gay men. Friends, not a problem, but the crucible, it seems, for my growth, both in Buddhism and in myself, has been in intimate relationships. For me, there's a real sense of this intense desire to connect in an intimate way, which, the way I understand it, is for somebody to really get to know who you are at your core and accept that, with then this dynamic that the core of myself has to be rejectable ultimately. It's not good. It's not pretty. There's ugliness there. And so how do you have a healthy relationship and connect with somebody on this very intimate level when ultimately you're afraid you're going to be rejected? So that's played out a lot of different ways within intimate relationships for me, and is my growth edge as a person and as a Buddhist, because for me the philosophy of Buddhism, which relationships keep bringing up for me, is impermanence, and this fundamental goodness that the Buddha talks about, that our personalities are really, which seems so fundamental to all of us as kind of a real structure. In fact, in Western psychology, we talk about the personality structure. Feels so real and solid, and it's really just one more layer in the onion, getting down to something that's much more basic and fundamental. And the Buddha said that was fundamental goodness. So that's still a struggle for me to get in touch with that sense of fundamental goodness, independent of, deeper than external validation or external messages that I'm okay. It's a fundamental goodness, a fundamental wholeness that is said to transcend that ego, the ego need to have certain expectations and desires and demands from other people, and for me especially within relationships. I think I have a real idealized view of what the perfect relationship would be. My parents were models of this idealistic kind of relationship. They're still married after almost 50 years, and though they've had their ups and downs, they went to counseling and got through it, and they're each other's best friends, and so this is I think what I expect or want to happen. Just like Bill and some of the others through my 20s, real tough, and I really did a lot of self-medicating with alcohol, and just part of this process of trying to be okay within myself and with the world. Yes. All right, so that's a little bit about me, probably too much. I work as a psychologist, clinical psychologist at San Quentin. I've been there for about a year, and it's, as you might imagine, it's everything and more that you might think about the prison. There's an interesting series, by the way, going on right now on MSNBC. It's called Lockup. Some of you might have seen it already, and it's about San Quentin for 4 more episodes, a total of 6. So it's been on for 2 weeks, and it really gives you a taste of San Quentin. Although it kind of tweaks it on the dramatic negative side, of course. They're looking for ratings. What is true about San Quentin is it's a very toxic, paranoid environment in a lot of ways. And I'm talking from a staff perspective. For inmates, even more so. You know, it's an old, dirty, smelly, dark, rundown place in those tiers. There's 5 tiers in each block full of inmates. It was built for about 3,200 people, and it houses close to 6,000, between 5,000 and 6,000. As are most prisons in the CDC, California Department of Corrections, it's overcrowded, so many guys are underserved. The gym is no longer a gym; it's a dorm room now with 300 inmates in it, which sometimes feels like that could just be a tinderbox ready to blow. I work, as does Lee, he's my co-worker, as a psychologist there with the mentally ill. Not surprisingly, the population is so overcrowded that only the real sick guys, the real mentally ill guys, get any kinds of services. Lots of men in there would benefit from just coming to a group or getting some therapy. It's just not available. There are about 30 to 40 psychologists and treatment staff and support staff in the mental health department, and that just is enough to cover the guys who are about 20% of who need mental health services. I do group therapy with the inmates, which is the form of therapy that most guys get the most of. In other words, you kill the most birds with that stone than you would if everyone just got individual treatment. So I've tried and continue to bring in Buddhist ideas and Buddhist thought into the treatment room. Interestingly enough, there's a therapy for borderline personality disorder called dialectical behavior therapy, and it's been shown to work really well with folks with this particular personality disorder. And one of the main elements of that treatment is mindfulness. Borderline personality disorder, they're folks who are kind of defined by chaotic emotions and instability in relationships and a really unstable sense of self. And mindfulness increases what we call in psychology kind of the observing ego, stepping back and watching what's happening instead of how they characteristically identify with and engage in and become a part of this real roller coaster, volatile emotionality. So you're really, as we do in meditation, when I work with the guys, is talk to them about this stepping back process of observing and using those metaphors and images of thoughts and feelings kind of floating by as you watch it. Not surprisingly, it's really hard to do. If you think it's hard to do sometimes in a nice, quiet place like this, San Quentin is 10 times that difficult. So there are challenges there that you wouldn't find anywhere else in terms of practice. Being mindful, being quiet, breathing, watching the breath, watching one's thoughts and feelings also helps people learn how to tolerate crises and tolerate distress and modulate their emotions. If you're not buying into your feelings, you have more options on what to do with them. For me, the paradox often is, and I struggle that around with myself and with the inmates too, is that Buddhism teaches that the self is an illusion, essentially, and a way to freedom is by giving up that sense of self, by looking at it, deconstructing it, observing it, not identifying with that. And yet much of Western psychology and pathology, or the thoughts on how these pathologies develop, are based on a poor sense of self, especially personality problems. A poor sense of self is thought to be one of the fundamental causes of why people can't have healthy relationships, why they can't deal with all the stuff that comes in one's life, the pain, the suffering. And I think to a large extent that's true from what I've experienced as a therapist. So for me, the dialectic or the paradox is, okay, the self versus no self, and where is it healthy to come down on that continuum? And of course, for everybody it's different. I think I remember reading once the Dalai Lama, when he first came to the West, was really almost shocked how many Westerners had problems, issues around sense of self, around attachment to others, and feeling good about oneself, which is a state of being that comes pretty fundamentally to other cultures, at least where he was from. That wasn't a huge issue to be struggled with or fraught with when one took up this spiritual path. So I think it's different here in the West. And it's almost as if you have to have a strong sense of self in order not to have a self anymore, or to see through that strong sense of self. The folks I work with, you wouldn't want to encourage this idea, this sense that there is no self. I mean, they'd be spinning back the other way and not know how to come back from that. In fact, that's one of their main concerns at the time, is who am I and how do I deal with life? So for me, there's this constant tension between self and no self, both with my experience in my spiritual practice and with the guys I work with. But it definitely, at San Quentin, seems to have some positive effects for some of the guys who are willing to kind of really put some motivation and intent behind learning to observe themselves and their experiences. One helpful meditation that I do for them is actually based on sound. There, all day long, certainly, and sometimes all night long, there are people screaming, and there's clanging, and there's people who are psychotic sometimes will be screaming out in the middle of the night, and people who are angry, etc. So it's a very noisy place. And I encourage the guys to just sit on the edge of their cot or wherever in their cell and just attend to the sounds. Don't label them. Just kind of listen to the clanking over there, the keys, or the custody guy over here screaming, or your neighbor, whatever. Just for a few minutes, just to again get them to kind of step back from being invested in that experience. And so slowly we kind of work together to figure out what kinds of meditation or mindfulness practices would work for them. I learn and grow every time I do this with them as well, because they're sitting in cages, locked up when I'm having group with them, and that alone creates this barrier and this kind of surreal environment to do something that's supposed to be very helpful for other folks. But it's all, in the end, like Ram Dass said, grist for the mill. How can we use this experience right now? What is in this moment? The truth is that you're in a cage, and I'm here, and we're going to be together. And kind of bounce off that a lot of times. I think that's all I got.
So, we have time for some comments and questions. You guys are open to that.
Yeah.
Slightly.
Thank you both. Dan, a question. I'm always an advocate for public school kids and the law because the public doesn't know what's going on in public schools. I feel the same way hearing you talk about prisons. We don't know. I mean, we know, but we don't know. We don't care. what would be one single thing that we could do this afternoon? What bill could we, something to do that might remedy, because we know it's a political football in Sacramento. Is there one thing that you just wish people would write about or do to help alleviate?
Wow. That's a great question. I'm not sure I really have.
Is there a certain thing happening in Sacramento that we could say, do this?
Well, Schwarzenegger, being a Republican, even if he's kind of middle of the road Republican, his idea and his solution is to build more prisons, and that certainly doesn't solve the short-term problem of overcrowding. And it's such a complex issue because it's an entrenched system. Parole is part of the problem. That's a whole system that needs to be reformed. Because guys go back to prison for the smallest infraction. It doesn't have to be a violent problem or even has anything to do with drugs. When they're on parole, they just might be late for a meeting with the parole officer and they go right back to the sanguine and things like that. So I really couldn't tell you politically. I think certainly that the letter writing outreach we have here makes a big difference. I mean, I really am focusing at work. I have to focus on the individual experience of prison, and guys are just extremely isolated, even though they're around people all the time, and don't get a chance to really connect in a meaningful way with anybody else. So I think this outreach that we do is one of the best things we can do, because most of those guys are coming back out. And even though rehabilitation is in the title of the department, there's no rehab at this point. So I know that doesn't really answer your question. Yeah. So many of these guys don't feel like they're connected to anyone out there, in there. And that seems like the first place to start.
I was just curious, is it possible to have a Buddhist practice at San Quentin, and do you know inmates that are practicing, and have you seen any difference that it's made for those inmates?
Yeah, I think there are inmates there who have a vital, vibrant practice in Buddhism that has helped them get through. There have been books written by some inmates. Can't keep the titles right now. There's a prison outreach project that's based in North Carolina called the Human Kindness Foundation, and run by Bo Lozoff, and he's visited San Quentin. He's visited prisons all over the place and really got Buddhist practice in a very intense way started at some of the prisons. There's no formal Buddhist office, I should say, or meeting place.
There is. There's
Well,
a sangha that meets every Sunday, 20 to 25 guys, with a teacher coming, with one of the senior teachers of the Zen community, and there are groups that go in and teach meditation.
Yeah, there's the stuff. Yeah,
coming from
that's on Mondays,
from
right?
Buddhist community. So.
When I meant there isn't a set like there's a Protestant Catholic chapel, there's a Native American chapel or office, there's a Muslim building. So the Buddhist doesn't have anything set like that, but obviously there's practice.
Well, they have this group, and it was formed by prisoners who got to know each other, who were Buddhists, and asked the Zen Center community for a teacher, and are, interestingly enough, in control of the group. In other words, it's not a group that works with the teacher, and he formed it, and they follow his teachings. They have themselves, and they want people to come in. Like us.
It just goes to show you, I mean, the place is like a small city, and no one working there can know everything that's going on, for one thing. And also, if it's 25 guys, that's a very small group and a certain level, classification level. So I work with condemned guys who aren't going to be able to go to that group, or guys who are in the whole administrative segregation, they won't be able to go to that group. So they're going to have to get it from somewhere else if they're interested. But yeah, I mean, that's a good example, something I didn't know that was going on in a more formal way.
Is there a significant suicide rate?
Yeah, that's one of the things that our department, the mental health department, is working really hard to to ameliorate or to reduce. Historically, there's been a pretty high suicide rate. It's gotten better. The department has started to take that really seriously. But another paradox, I guess I like that thought today, is that for us as psychologists, for Lee and myself, at least working with guys who are lifers or condemned, especially the condemned, is working on keeping them healthy mentally so that the state can kill them. It's really absurd when you think about it, because you can't let them kill themselves. We want to do it.
I'm just, Bill, you've had a lot of experience singing, right, in groups. And there is some choral stuff that happens in prison. Has there ever been any study or consideration of the impact of singing in a group in terms of rehabilitation from the inside out? I mean, I know most people who love to sing know it keeps them.
Yeah, sure. You can hear them singing out on the yard.
Yeah.
Such, so. I think, and Lee might know more about it than me.
Yeah.
I read not too long ago that back in the 70s, St. Quentin had a symphony orchestra of inmates. They had like a 17-piece. Yeah, I know. I think when it was less crowded, there were a lot more things that could be done. Right now, it's so crowded and with potentially so many problems in keeping all these men where they're supposed to be and contained, and that a lot of that perhaps doesn't get to happen right now.
So it's 3 strikes and non-violent drug offenders that are overcrowded in prisons.
Yeah. Of course, death row is growing every year. There are over 620 men now on death row. And San Quentin's the only place with the condemned in California. That's where you go.
How about a song?
Praise of Lydia the tattoo lady. Right on the spot. I'll give you a verse, okay? Let's see if I can find the right key.
Gotta stand up, come on.
Oh. Is this Buddhist? I don't know.
Yeah.
Lydia, oh Lydia, say have you met Lydia, oh Lydia the tattoo lady? She has eyes that folks adore so, and a torso even more so. Lydia, oh Lydia, that encyclopedia, Lydia the queen of tattoo. On her back is the battle of Waterloo, beside it the wreck of the Hesperus too. And proudly above wave the red, white, and blue. You can learn a lot from Lydia.
possible venues that a psychologist could work in. What in the world could attract you? It baffles my mind because that's such a difficult environment. What attracted you there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I have experience. I worked in corrections in Kentucky for several years. For one thing, I wanted to move to the Bay Area, and there are always jobs in corrections. But I also knew what I was doing. I mean, when you feel like you've helped somebody there, it's a really great feeling. It doesn't happen a lot, but you know, you do feel like you're doing something important when somebody seems to benefit from it. So, in a private practice, for me, just sitting for 8 hours a day with different folks, one-on-one, would get very isolating. I think the coworkers are great. So different reasons, I suppose, but it's feeling like I'm helping people is maybe the biggest one. There's so much need in prison. It's like a black hole of need, so I can feel like a big fish there, I guess.
We can do a pen now. Will you guys be available for more questions after we close? Yeah. We need to move on. Do we have a host?
I'm the host today. I brought refreshments for us afterwards for the social time. And just a few reminders for people. There's usually a group that goes out to lunch afterwards that will meet by the door in the back. So if you want to go to lunch with folks, that'll be available. We asked for a dana or contribution, $5 or more, if you can. And then we have sign-up sheets if you want to be on our mailing list, or then you can sign up. It's generally by the Donville, or you can ask anybody who knows where it is. If you use a teacup, be sure and wash it out.
I thought you were going to do that first.
No, I'm not going to.
Any announcements?
This is a little bit long. This week is there's going to be several events taking place in a program called the Iraq Moratorium. Some of you who are old enough, and quite a few of you remember there was a moratorium during the Vietnam War, an attempt to stop that war. This is a nationwide event taking place all over the country. There'll be a number of, and it's supposed to be all quiet, mainly silent work. So you may encounter some groups at various train stations or on the steps of community areas. There's about 50 events planned that are small, and one hopefully large vigil taking place on Friday the 21st at the Post and Market, which the Montgomery Station is, which is also the office of Feinstein. That's the silent culmination of the day. I've been working with a coordinating group for this on behalf of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. I have with me some little explanation of the moratorium and a black ribbon, because the hope is throughout the country on Friday everybody will wear a black ribbon like this, and just to signify. And the intention is to continue this. Hopefully, it will grow and spread, and we can create more consciousness among us as we have our lattes that there's a war going on someplace else that we're responsible for. So I'm gonna hand these out, and for anybody that likes them, you can always use a ribbon. We're all gay. We can use a ribbon. That's it. I was so moved by both of you guys. I can't.
Any other announcements? Yes.
There are registration forms for the annual GBF Fall Retreat by the Donville outside. It's about a month away, October 12th through the 14th, at Vajrapani Institute. And there is scholarship money available. So if you have any sort of economic issue, don't hesitate to ask for help. And as Bill mentioned, a retreat can be a wonderful opportunity for renewal or for deepening your practice. There'll be a nice balance of structured silent time, some experiential stuff, and some time to just connect and talk. So please consider coming. Thanks.
I thought it might be a nice idea to revive the GDF potlucks, so I'm going to have one at my house on Sunday, September 30th, the last Sunday in the month at 6:30. My house is not that far from here on Church and 18th, so if people want to come here, go to lunch, and go to dinner, they can have a whole GDF day. And I have the information on little cards that I'll pass around.
Thank you.
Next week, our speaker is Eve Siegel, who is a sort of an energy therapist and a coach, and she's been here twice before. She has a wonderful listening presence and these terrific experiential sessions. So look forward to that. You guys, thank you so much. I know you're going
Anyone interested? There's a meditation group on Tuesday nights at my house at Baker and Colton. And if you're interested, just talk about
And I have one announcement too. The same weekend is the GBF retreat. There is that small gay men's retreat that Bill was talking about in the book. If anyone is interested in that, you can see Bill and me about the details. Are there any other announcements before we close? Okay. Turn the hands.
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.